IUBH. Fern, aber nah.
Dear students, welcome back to Unit 6 in Managing in a Global Economy. Today we want to talk about organization in international business. What are the study goals that we are aiming for today? First of all, we want to familiarize ourselves with the different approaches to business organization. And we then look into the traditional and into the more contemporary organizational structures. And finally, we want to discuss methods and mechanisms that are used in organizational practice, and of course we want to relate them to international business activities. Now, what in general is an organizational structure? If we look into an organization, we find a set of formal structures, then a coordination system, and finally control systems. The formal structure means that we have a formal arrangement of jobs within a company, and this is specified by roles and relationships. We have actually two dimensions that we can distinguish if we look into traditional organizational structures. First of all, we have a vertical differentiation, and that refers basically to the question how decision-making is carried out. Is it in a rather centralized way or is it rather decentralized? Horizontal differentiation means that we have a setup of formal structure with definitions and a structure of all tasks within an organization, and that then relates to every single job in a company. What we want to do now in terms of the traditional organizational designs is that we look into three commonly known traditional setups, and that is the functional structure, the divisional structure, and the matrix structure, and I trust you have heard about them already in other subjects of your studies. Let's first look at the functional structure. I think it's straightforward and you will easily understand that here are different functions of a company and they mark certain departments within this company. Now you can understand that with more international operations, you come to certain limits in terms of the expansion of this structure. And to some degree, that is also true for the divisional structure. And we have an example here for an international divisional structure. You can see that beside the departments for certain products, we then have an international division that then would be active in certain products and also in certain countries. Again, we would have the problem, how can we expand this structural setup if we have widespread operations all over the globe? The third traditional organizational structure is the matrix structure. And you might have seen already that in another subject, for example, in organizational studies. This structure is marked by two management levels, product management and regional management. Now, decision-making is made through joint, let's say, approaches where the managers of the two managerial levels would come together for decision-making. Of course, you can find all kinds of problems and interferences here because you have different interests, and so these managers have to come to a common understanding, which is not always easy in daily business. We now want to look into modern organizational structures, the more contemporary setups. The problem of the traditional organizations are that they are rather static and they are too slow to facilitate timely information flow, something which is so important today in international business. Now, modern organizational designs aim at removing boundaries. The flow of information has to be accelerated, and by that also knowledge transfer will become easier. In detail, it's actually about removing or at least limiting or reducing vertical, horizontal, and also external boundaries. Let me just briefly address external boundaries because these are the boundaries that would be the connection between your company and your the outside stakeholders of your company. I have one example here for a modern organization, and this is a network structure. What you can see here is you have a core company, and that would engage with certain partner companies. And these partner companies have some kind of expertise and knowledge in certain fields. So as a core company, you would not try to have ownership and control over all the steps on the value chain, but you would somehow probably subcontract these functions, or you would come to other formal agreements with your respective partner companies. A second organizational structure that is very modern is the so-called virtual organization. It's not pretty much different to the network structure, but it's heavily dependent on information technology. We understand a virtual organization as one that is seen to be a temporary arrangement among partners that can be easily reassembled to adapt to market changes. And the emphasis is on reassembly. Why? Because if the market changes, if demand is changing, then you can come to a new composition of your virtual organization. And many times that is going via the internet, via email, in that knowledge, and certain capacities are transferred electronically. Now, the characteristics of such a setup is more or less contrary to vertical hierarchies. In such a virtual organization, you would not aim for ownership and control along the value chain. It's rather about securing resources and capabilities in temporary networks. Temporary means that after a while, you might open up your virtual organization again because you need new partners for new projects, and you could separate from others that so far have been included in your network. Now, modern organizational designs come with advantages and disadvantages as any other structure. Some advantages are that these designs are flexible, they enable fast decision-making processes, and they respond quickly to changing demands in markets. The adaptability we have been talking about already is rather high, and you have little overhead costs because you have your network partners that carry some of these costs in their organizations. With this flexible and very fast-paced approach to organization, you also support innovation. On the other hand, you have disadvantages in modern organizations as well. Individual managers can still act opportunistically as they can in the more traditional structures. And informal structures are even more difficult to identify in these setups. Why? Because you are not in control of parts of such a network. By that, we can also say that you have limited control over processes. Again, because your network partners to some degree control their own operations, and you have only limited access to that. Now we want to talk about coordination and control, because that is more or less the operational part of organizational structures. And first we want to discuss coordination systems. And we have actually three sort of possibilities to coordinate within an organization. We have coordination by standardization, by plan, and by mutual adjustment. Now what I have to say is you won't find a coordination system that is marked by only one of these characteristics. None of them are standing alone, but you find organizations with an emphasis on one or the other structure. Coordination by standardization means that you have universal rules that are applicable throughout the organization. By that, you enable consistent decision-making, but you have an element of inflexibility, and that is increasing in its degree when it comes to international and diverse operations. Coordination by plan is sort of the opposite, in that you would have only a limited set of rather general objectives, but then the detailed planning would be carried out on a local level. So there's more flexibility and also more responsiveness to what is needed in your respective branches and subsidiaries. Coordination by mutual adjustment would mean that you remove the static of all the other coordination systems. It's marked by an informal coordination on a case-to-case basis, and it requires ongoing communication among managers. Now the problem is that here you have probably the lowest level of formal coordination, and that of course also comes with some problems. That is why, as I told you, none of these coordination systems comes alone. You would always opt for a mix of it. We now want to talk about control methods. And again, we have three different, let's say, characteristics or possibilities how to structure your control methods. We distinguish between market control, bureaucratic control, and clan control. And again, you will find elements of all of them in a company, but then to a varying degree. Market control means that you would use external indicators. And these external indicators you would use all over and throughout your organization. They provide some kind of objectivity, but on the other hand, you have to respect that influences beyond managerial control are possible and would then not be taken into account sufficiently. Bureaucratic control would mean that rules and regulations are offered and provided by headquarters, and this is very inflexible. So bureaucratic control that is mainly dependent on what headquarters is saying in terms of control methods would be less suitable for a complex international organization. Clan control is based on a shared set of values, and these values would determine the right behavior and also what is expected in terms of performance. So this is an approach which is pretty much trust-based. But of course, you can't run a company and also control a company only on clan control. Finally, we want to talk about control mechanisms. And to mention the most important, and you will find that in more or less every organization, we have written reports. Normally they are to some degree standardized, and you have to follow a certain format that the company already provides. Reports are used more or less all over in organizational structures. If it comes to international business, it is also very important that from time to time you visit your subsidiaries. Personal visits mean that you have to travel, but it's important to be in personal contact and to see what is going on the ground internationally. Management performance control, we have been talking about this issue already, a very important control mechanism, and you have to consider the specifics of international business as we have discussed before already. Cost and accounting control means that you also look into the figures of your subsidiaries, but then of course with an element of appreciation of what is going on in foreign countries. And that is also relating to evaluative measurement, which is basically a control mechanism which after a period of time looks back into what happened in your organization. Students, with that I want to summarize this unit. We have been talking about traditional organizational designs, and then we discussed the more modern organizational setups. And finally, we had a look into coordination and control systems within organization in an international business. With that, we come to the end of this unit. I thank you for your attention, and I'm pretty much looking forward to see you in Unit 7 again. Thank you so much.
IUBH. Fern, aber nah.